first grade, right?
And the other one is in fifth.
In fifth, all right, good.
I've
And
done fifth grade.
fifth graders, so I'll try and go fast through the first bits and more address fifth grade questions as well. So the focus of this part of the night is grades 3 through 6. And so what the assumption is, although I will fly through the first things really quickly, in third grade, this is really for the fluent reader. And so up until kindergarten first and second, they're really learning how to decode, how to crack the code, how to, figure out chunks of words and word families and how to read automatically. Once that's in place, the next big hump is not being able to read the words, but being able to remember what you read. And so that's what this whole section is about. And so what does it mean to read fluently and how to get there? The first is just a statistic. All the teachers ask that you read, he moves. Sorry, I didn't know that. Read at least 15 or 20 minutes every night. And I know when my children were going through and I read that, I thought, that's not much. But, you get busy, and so you don't do it, or something doesn't happen, or they can't get the half an hour that you think they should have. But at the end of first grade, every student in here was reading 69 words per minute. Some of them were reading 140 words per minute. That's first grade. So we know in fifth grade, even if they're reading 100 words per minute, there's not a fifth grader here that's reading 100 words per minute. I think our slowest fifth grade readers is reading 120. And some of them are reading 210. Those I tell to slow down. If they're reading even 100 words per minute, which is what our second graders and third graders are reading, they're reading 547,000 words a year, even if they're only reading for 15 minutes. That is just practice with vocabulary, decoding strategies, storylines, sentence structures. Even if it's 15 minutes, it's worth it. So if you're squeezing it in between baseball and soccer and piano lessons and the older boy doing this and the younger boy doing that and baths, it's still worth it. So try to find this time. It's huge to have the routine. Very soon. What grade is your
My daughter is in grade 5.
Grade 5, so all grade 5, all right, I'm really gonna hit grade 5.
Okay.
All right, very soon, they're gonna be in middle school, you got this year and next year. And so, you really have these 2 years to solidify that routine, because it's gonna get more complicated. They're going, and you want them to be involved in a lot of things. They've gotta do other things besides the things in their head. They've got to be physically active or musically active or artistically active. We know they need that. So it's going to be even harder to find that time. But every year at the beginning of the year, the thing on the listserv I sent out, beginnings are important. Every year you're going to tweak it. But if you can find that routine for your fifth grader that works for everybody else, that it's just a non-negotiable time, they're going to carry that with them through high school and through their life. One of the things I found out with one of the fifth graders last year who taught me, the children are teaching me things all of the time. He was just flatlining. I mean, we were giving him one-on-one instruction. We were reading with him every day. I mean, one-on-one, the teacher as well, and the small group, and the one-on-one. I mean, and, another 2 small groups. We were getting him, and he was still just... What we found out, or what I was realizing as he was talking to me, is that he didn't have a natural kind of organization in his head. He didn't notice patterns. He didn't notice that every day we put our books here, and then we did this, and then we did this. It was like looking at a picture. There's the flower, this girl. You know how you look at photographs if you're in an art gallery, and you look at a painting, and your mind doesn't go left to right. You don't read a painting like that. It looks at the splash of color here and this and that. That's the way he was seeing the world. We started establishing, or not establishing, he had routines all over the place, but letting him know what it was, his reading went up a grade level. So by getting these routines in your life and having them, and even just saying, what's the pattern in this, how are you going to know where to find the candles in this big, in Target? And then they notice the signs hanging up. For them to see the patterns in the world around them, that's getting the big picture. That's the main idea. When they can start having a pattern in their life and seeing what it means, then they can get the main idea in their reading. And so having conversations that start one place back and forth, that are leading somewhere, is enormous, because they have to get those patterns to understand main idea and to understand the whole big thing about a story. So that's a really big thing, with just having this routine every single night, establishing it so that when they get into high school, it is not a fight. They have been doing this, and they are going to do it. And, well, all right, it'll be occasionally a fight, but hopefully less so. So the three things, no matter what the age is, that helps reading the most. Interestingly enough, the first thing is they have lots of books, or they at least have something to read. That it's there, it's in their hand, and it's in their house, and they don't have to go anywhere. Trips to the library, taking advantage of this library, making sure to get their books back, to get new books, that's huge. This is number one, that they have books they want to look at, that they have some choice. Now, this isn't a choice of anything in the whole wide world, but a choice between two things that are good choices, and that's where you can help and where the teacher helps. So they don't have to have the library of choice, because that's overwhelming, but if you can say, right now, are you going to read this book or this book? And they're both good. When he or she picks this one, they've done all these studies, their brain starts firing up, and they get more excited. And you can see the synapses when they did these studies of the brain lighting up. They get excited to read because they kind of will buy into it. So it's not carte blanche choice, because that's very overwhelming for a child, but a selected choice. And then this good fit books. And on here are a couple of bookmarks you can take home. There's two different ones on what a good fit book is. This is huge, and this is another thing that the students taught me. When I was teaching, and I'd have book clubs, and this book club could read like this, and this book club could read harder books, and this book club could read harder books, and I'd have maybe 5 or 6 going. But there was always a student who was in between. These were too easy, these were too hard. What do? I want them to have the companionship of a book club, but I want them to learn. Well, I thought, despite the fact that all the research said differently, I thought if I just support them, they'll learn more quickly if I put them in the harder group. Well, one time there was this girl, I will love her forever. She was in the lower reading group. She wasn't ready for the next one. The problem was the next group was this group of boys that were driving her nuts. And so I thought, if she gets in that group, she's just going to shut down. So I'm going to keep her in this group that really is too easy for her. But I'm just going to give her more books, and I just can't worry about it. Her reading ability went up, this was in first grade then, went up 6 levels in 3 weeks. And it's what all the research says. I just didn't believe it. But in fact, they learn more quickly when the books are a little easy. Interestingly enough, this is another thing. When you read out loud to your child, and hopefully you still do, they taught me this last year too. I want to do some research with someone on this. When they're listening to a book, so I was seeing if they could listen as well as they could read and still answer questions. If they were reading at a 4th grade book and I read a 5th grade book, they could answer the questions. When I read a 6th grade book, they couldn't. So even when they're listening to you read, it can only be 1 grade level higher than what they're at. And that they taught me. And I have all the numbers to prove it. And so that's a huge thing. So even, you think, well, I'm reading it to them, of course they understand it. It wasn't true. At least not what I was seeing in what I'm watching here. And again, there hasn't been a big research project that I've seen about it. I hope it gets done. I'm talking to some people about that. So that's something else. Even when you're reading to them, read the next level up. So if they're in 5th grade, find out the Lexile. I think it's between 7 and 800 or 8 and 900. But the Lexile for 6th grade. Get books at that level, so what they're doing is they're hearing the difficulty of the words and the more complex sentence structures of what's coming next. And then by the time they have to read it, they've heard it. That's going to get you a ton more mileage than trying to read Shakespeare too slow.
Can you talk a little bit about that Lexile number, what
Yes.
that means and where they can find that?
When you get the NWEA scores, which is going to come home with the report cards, do they get the RIT on that? I think they do.
Yes. and
Okay,
it-
there's 2 numbers. One is called RIT, and I have no idea what it stands for.
Roush unit, it's the measurement unit.
All right. Educators love acronyms. So RIT is a measure of comprehension. So that RIT it's what's called a SMART test, the NWEA. So as they're answering questions, if they get it right, it gets more complicated. They get that right, it gets more complicated. If they miss that, it stays the same. They still miss it, it gets easier. So this test, it's SMART, and it's figuring out exactly how hard they can make the questions. So the RIT is the difficulty of the questions and how well they understand what they're reading. So there's a certain cutoff for each grade that we want them to be at. If you look at the percentile, the percentile's a bell curve. So if they're between 40 to 60, that means they're average. If they're 60, so it's not like getting grades A, B, C, D, F, where you want 90 to 100s and A. It's not that. Bell curve. So 40 to 60 is average, that's most kids. 60 to 70, and then that 90% is the skinny part of the bell curve where you don't have many. If they're below 40%, I already know who they are. If they're below 25%, we're working one-on-one. So we're really watching these students, and we're really watching these students, both ends, a lot.
You actually observe each child like one-to-one,
If they're on an, especially this lower extreme, yes.
but the one like are in the middle, they're like in
The middle, the teachers do. Every teacher reads with every child every week, one-on-one, in the entire school. Every teacher is documenting every week what she's hearing your child do.
So they actually read aloud to the teacher. I'll have to go check.
Yeah, if they read aloud to the teacher, if they don't need, if they're decoders, that's not what they need.
Okay.
So they've read aloud, every student in here has read aloud to the teacher at the beginning. This is a great question. Every student has read aloud to the teacher, every single student, at the beginning of the year. If they're decoders, they're automatic. They can read the words easily, they read with expression, and all of that, then that's not their problem. Their problem isn't figuring out words. Then, we know we don't have to worry about them reading out loud to us. We know they can read words. What we need to know is, do they remember it, and can they understand it, and can they talk about it? So at that point, if we know that's not their main issue, we're not going to necessarily listen to them read. We're going to have them read something, and then they're going to talk to us about it. And we're going to see if they can get these in-depth questions. We're going to see if they can tell us the stories of what it's about in detail. And so then if we can't, then we try and problem solve. Is this a good fit book? Because if you can't tell me about it, why? We need to pick a better book. Because if it's a good fit book, you should be able to tell me about it. And so we're working at finding that match. And the whole first 6 weeks, I would say, at the beginning of the school is where's the magic book? Not the book, but what is it where you can read it, you can remember it, and you can talk about it, because otherwise it's boring. And they don't like to read when they can't remember, because you're just reading words. So that was a really good question. So yes, 3 times a year, every teacher reads with every child out loud. So even if they're reading 210 words per minute in August, we are still going to read out loud with them again in December, just to see where it's going. And we're still going to read out loud with them, or they're going to read out loud to us in May. So we have these checkpoints 3
Do you
times.
still encourage parents, like when they're 5th graders, that parents should read aloud with them?
If where that comes in, and again, it depends. If they're decoding and they've got that part down, put the responsibility on them, but they should be able to talk about it. So in other words, this is our time to read. All right, you're going to read these 2 pages here. Afterwards, I'm going to ask you what this part's about. And then they should be able to tell you. And if they can't, then I would have them go back and read it out loud and work from there. Because either the book's too hard or usually the book's too hard. That's usually the problem. So you want the responsibility to become to them, because starting in 3rd, 4th grade, they're reading more and more silently. And they have to bridge that gap of reading out loud and getting it versus reading silently and getting it. And that slide's going to come up too, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. Keep questions too then. Oh, that's a fun one. This is the Good Fit book. They get a choice, so they have a choice. Why do they want to read it? Do they like reading it? Do they understand? That's all the way up. And if you don't, what are the strategies that are going to help you? If you're reading a 5th grade social studies book and you're supposed to know it and you don't get it, what are you going to do? What are the strategies to help you understand? What's that check for understanding? This is huge. The strategies, I was telling this to the earlier group, the strategies they learn in 1st grade is the same strategies you learn in college. It's just the book's harder. How do you do those same things? Do I understand it? Am I making an image? What are the hard words? What's interesting about the story? How do the characters change? It's just the complexity of the text that changes, not the strategy. So everything every teacher's telling them all the way up is just adapted to a higher level. Coming back to text scores too, there's a second number on there. So the Ritz text comprehension. The other one's called Lexile. This is the number that's on a lot of the books now and is on our library webpage. Lexile is math. They take how long the word is, literally how many letters are in the word, they take an average, how many words are in a sentence. As they go up in grade level, the average word gets longer and the average sentence gets longer. That's basically the difference between 5th and 6th grade. So, your child's reading at a certain lexile. That is about the right length of word and about the right sentence of word that they can manage and still understand it before it gets so complicated with the ands and the does and the becauses and the nots that they just lose it. So you can go on the website here, type in their lexile, which you'll get off the NWEA page, type in things they're interested in, and it'll come up with a list of the books in this library that's at their lexile and at their interest level.
I guess the child knows their lexile.
They usually do, because they talk about that. They talk about these scores and what they mean. It's going to come home with a report card. So a page in the report card is going to have that RIT score, it's going to have where their percentile is, and it's going to have the lexile. So it'll have those 3 things. Great questions. Really good questions. Small groups are nice, you get to ask more questions. So this is the gap between fluency, that they can read accurately, and I think the students in here have got that down. Typically by 3rd grade, they're reading 99% accuracy. This is not a problem. They might read slow, but it's accurate. And if not, we're in there. We're intervening. We're helping. And are they reading? Oh, this is when I showed this slide that obviously you don't read everything. We don't read to get the language. And so we don't want our children to read like that either. That's not how we read. So that's what that slide is about, accuracy, that we're integrating lots of things to read, not just letter by letter. And then if they're reading slow and choppy, what we're doing, because we want it to be automatic. If they're spending all their time figuring words out, they can't remember as much because all their effort's going into the words. So we want to make it automatic, and that's repetition. Just rereading the same thing until it sounds like the way we talk. And then another one. Even if you read it, they read it, you read it together. That's all good. These are just different ways that you can build that fluency so it's faster. Caveat. After they get to about 100 or 130 or 140 words per minute, the speed does not matter. In fact, it can work against them. They can read 160 words per minute, but all they're doing is blabbing the words out. They think reading is reading words. Reading is not reading words. Reading is understanding. So they have to get past this idea of reading's reading words to reading's enjoying it. I gave a talk at the beginning of 5th grade with a biography, and before I started I said, if you are not thrilled when you read, if you're not crying or excited or dazzled or go, wow, that's an amazing fact, you're not really reading. Because these are good books. They should amaze you. They should make your heart go thumpity thump. They should be doing something. And so it's reading slowly enough to get the nectar out of these books. And so once they get to reading quickly, it's about reading deeply and savoring. I mean, you find those lines where you just go, oh, and then you mark the page. That's what we want them to do. Reading poetry is another way to develop fluency. I was doing sonnets with one of the 6th graders last year. And very gifted 6th grader. And it was hard. But you do it line by line, and it's dazzling as well. I mean, short little sonnets, 22 lines. Oh my goodness, you got a week's worth of work out of there. So it can be something short, but it's this beauty of language and beauty of vocabulary. And they read it again and again, and they get that rhythm. Poetry's gold. But you've got to read it more than once. You've got to. Because the beauty is in saying it, not in reading it. The truly fluent reader, first and foremost, you should celebrate. When they're fluent, this world is theirs. Every book in this library is theirs. It's a beautiful, beautiful moment. They are launched. You can still read together, and what I mean by that is, if it's their time to read, and you're reading at the same time, it's the family time, that is very powerful. So if you want to support your child reading, read at the same time. Just that act that this is the quiet time, and this is you're on that end of the couch, I'm on this end of the couch, I have my book, you have your book, I'm going to ask you what you said, you can ask me what my book's about, we're going to talk about it. It's also delightful. And my daughter and I still do it, and she's 24. So, in fact, she's going to be a teacher. Playing word games, talking about books and movies. Can they tell you about it, these conversations? What do you think happened? I wouldn't have done that. Would you have done that? Rich, deep conversations about stories, books, nonfiction. Because that's, again, what's going to get them to the next level, having that. Have them be a museum docent. If they go to the museum and they get to read the little blurbs, they get to ask the questions, because those are hefty words. So if you go to a museum, they can be the ones asking questions. It makes them engaged. Have some funny stories about that. Find ways to delve deeper into conversations. It doesn't have to be about reading. You're modeling in your own language, your own interest. So that, for those readers who are reading silently, your gold is coming from the conversations about the books. And it does check to see if they actually remember it. Critical questions. Here's what I found. Through your students, or our students here, 2nd and 3rd grade, they can read out loud. They're on grade level. I can take the same story where they read the first 2 pages to me. They could tell me the beginning, they could tell me the middle, they could tell me the end, they told me it in exact words, they described things, they could answer questions. Same story, but the later part of the story they read silently. They could only tell me 2 or 3 things. At first, when they're moving from reading out loud to reading silently, they drop an entire grade level. We know that. Well, they've taught me that. And so we have to bridge this gap. So the first one is, if they're reading and decoding and they can read out loud and tell you about it, that's done. Then, can they read the next page or 2 silently and do it as well? And that's what you're trying to close this gap. And eventually, a lot of times, they read better silently than they read out loud. It switches after a while. So that's the first gap. It happens in 3rd and 4th grade typically. where their silent reading catches up with their out loud reading. The other question is, can they listen to someone reading a story and be able to tell them as much as if they read it themselves? And as I told the other group, I fail at this. I am a terrible listener. Mrs. Loudon was laughing. I have to she's agreeing with me. I have to take notes.
Yeah.
Because I start thinking about something and I just missed 5 sentences. And I know that about myself. So I have to compensate. And so they're all different. If they are not good at listening, they're missing the teacher's instruction. And they're missing a big part of the day. And that goes back to the conversations. They have to have these conversations to develop this. The better they listen, the faster they're going to learn. Can your child do all of these things and still understand and remember the text? When we actually measure it, we actually listen to them and ask questions, especially if they're having a hard time, to figure out which one is it. And then we can help once we know that. Common Core is our Indiana standards that we're moving to. And what it is, many states have the same goals. And by having states agree, if they choose to agree on these goals, means that when parents and families move from state to state, we're talking the same talk. And so that's helpful for families who are moving. The other thing I like about it, it's this very high emphasis on reading nonfiction. Starting in 4th grade and 5th grade, especially 5th and 6th grade, and I'll come back to that later, a lot more nonfiction than we used to teach. Why? Because that's what our kids need to do in the workforce. If they are a construction worker, they're having to read very complex blueprints, and I hope they can. It's high stakes. So we think, construction worker, they don't have to have much of it. The manuals for electricians, it's complicated. The Lexile for those manuals is college level Lexile. So for those construction workers and electricians who we think may not need a college education, well, they need to be able to read college to read those texts. We have to do this because the most basic jobs now are requiring that. And so we're really doing that. High emphasis on written response. In other words, don't just tell me, you need to write down what you're reflecting about this. I love this one. A high emphasis on supporting the statements with facts from the text, from media, from people, from experiences, and knowing where you're getting your information from. In this day of internet, where anybody can put anything on that thing and it looks good, you have to be very discerning, and you have to know where you're getting your information from and if it's reliable. We have to teach our children this. We have to. And, they have to discern this. So why do you know that this is what happened in the story? How do you know this is true? Was it something in the text? Was it a reliable text? Was it something you experienced that you know firsthand? Was it something somebody told you? Was it something you heard on television? Okay, which program? And they have to start separating that knowledge out because it's different levels of reliability. So we're having them really do this, and it's important. It's very important. So that's the difference between Common Core. The Indiana standards are very good. They're very good. It's taking those and upping it a notch. And so there's a kind of controversy as to whether we'll stay with Indiana and go to Common Core. And that's kind of the difference. We're going to be fine either way. The Indiana standards are good, but this is just kind of upping the ante and making those states who are going back and forth kind of on the same page. This is that reading silently. They have to read silently the same way they read out loud. They tend to read great out loud with expression and everything, and then they go blah, 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 blah in their heads, and I know, because they can't tell me about the story. So this is the thing. In their heads, they still have to hear the voices talking. They still have to hear the granny voice, and they have to hear the dad voice, and they have to hear the bear voice. They've got to hear these voices in their head, even when they're reading silently. That's what's going to bridge that gap. They usually go down a whole grade level when they begin, So monitoring what they remember is that critical third and fourth grade step. By fifth grade, they should have this. So then, oh, this is the other one. Character. This our kids taught me. Students who we were doing so much with them, we were reading with them, we were getting good fit books. Mom and Dad were on board. Everything. And they couldn't tell me about a story, 150 words per minute. Reading like a dream. Couldn't tell me a thing. Then, one day, I asked someone, I said, well, who's this story about? Which we talked about, but it was a bit more pointed. I didn't take a little answer. I said, who's it about? And he goes, Jack. I said, oh. And who was Jack? Granddad? Jack was the dog. How could he know and understand the story when he thought Jack was, who was the dog, was the granddad? It messed the whole thing up. Of course he couldn't remember it. In 5 minutes, once I said, all right, the first question I'm going to ask, you need to tell me what this part's about, or who, not what. That was my mistake. I went to the what. Who is in this part of the story? You cannot say he and she. The proper names of this part of the story and what their relationship is. All right. We read another story because he already knew the ones from that one. Picked another one at his level. He did that question. He went up a grade level in 15 minutes. It was an organization brain thing. His brain hadn't cued in, and I was talking to an IU professor about this today. She said she got goosebumps. And I think we might have a research project coming because it is pretty phenomenal that this one thing catapulted their ability to retell and tell a story. So this is something, just knowing the names of those characters and their relationships for an organizational tool, and their brain just, everything comes down from that, and they remembered a lot more. Retelling is not as simple as the beginning, middle, and end anymore. 5th and 6th grade, it's not, I had breakfast, we went to school, I played, I had dinner, I did my homework, I went to bed. That's kindergarten, first, maybe second, third. 6th grade, they're starting a story, and then grandpa's telling what happened when he was a kid. And then the mom's telling what happened when she went to work. It's jumping all over the place in different settings and different times. They don't go in order anymore. And so that beginning, middle, and end stuff that works for 2nd and 3rd grade is much more complicated. When I was talking with the 6th graders, I said, you have to understand this isn't happening anymore. You have to realize what the timeline is. So those two things are really important in 5th and 6th grade in fiction. Discriminate what a character in a story feels and how they would feel in a similar situation. They have a real hard time. If they would be angry, then that character's angry, whether the character was angry or not. If the character's not feeling the way they would feel in that situation, they can have a hard time divorcing that, and it skews their understanding of the story. So kind of keeping themselves a little detached from the story so they can understand that character in that situation. And in 5th and 6th grade, it gets a little more complicated. They're just more mature. Again, citing evidence from the text. What in the story told you that the boy was excited when his piggy bank broke? I would have been mad. He was excited. All right. What was the cue? And so that's also a big change in 5th and 6th grade for fiction. Here's the big nonfiction. Enormous change to understanding nonfiction texts in 5th grade. Revolutionary War. They're going to study that. Explorers, Native Americans, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the 3 legislative processes. 4th grade, they're doing Indiana history, landforms. 6th grade, Greeks and Romans, Middle Ages, incredible science topics and all sorts of levels. They have to be able to understand, to read a nonfiction text, know what it's about, and know the details. And they are having a hard time. I'm just laying it out there. This is very hard for them. If we give them an easy enough book, they can get a little bit. But this is hard. A larger emphasis on science and social studies. It's about maybe 40% of the curriculum now. When they're in high school, it's 80%. So this is really important, these next 2 years on this. They need to differentiate in fiction between the thesis and the main idea. The thesis is that whole big universal theme. The details and then the fluff, the extra stuff that is nice, but it doesn't actually help build on the main idea and the thesis. They need to take more than one article. This is in 6th grade. They have this article on Pluto and this article on Pluto. Look at both of them and come up with their own thesis and main ideas to support it, and the details to support the main idea with multiple resources. If they can get this in 6th grade, so I'm telling you these 2 years are huge, they will be fine in college. It's big. Now they have in 7th and 8th grade, but here they have one teacher all day that can microscopically help them manage. So this is big. This is what the children taught. I would sit there and say, make sure you read the headings, because that'll help you understand it. And they would read the first one, and they wouldn't read any of the other ones. They skip them. So they'll be reading, and there might be a heading, 3 paragraphs, a heading with 3 paragraphs. And they would read the first one, blah, 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 and they would skip that heading, blah, 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 and skip the heading, blah, blah, blah. And they couldn't remember. The only thing they remembered is the things that interested them, but they couldn't tell me what it was about. When, same thing, I said, okay, you flatlined for a year now. We took the same book, but a different page. Said, before you read this, we're going to look at every picture, we're going to read every caption, we're going to read every heading, we're going to talk about where this is going and what it's about, and then you're going to read it. Went up a grade level. Because this is the main idea. When they didn't have the main idea, which was the heading and the pictures and the other things, all they had was this random details here and there. And they didn't know what the whole thing, the point was. They missed the big idea. This, just like the character, previewing, looking at all those text features, looking at all those main ideas is huge. So that was something, again, the slide wasn't in there last year. That, yep, 2 minutes. This is what I was talking about, the entry level to work. We talked about that earlier. And the rest of these slides are just things to access here. So on the library, and it's on the PowerPoint that's there. Again, you can come here, and Mrs. DeLiso, it's one of the best library sites in the country. It's phenomenal. We've got book lists. You can type in the Lexiles and the book choices and get books here. She has lists of the books the kids are reading right now, what they like, what's popular, different genres that they might like. So that's I use it to help pick books for the students. Everybody's past 3rd grade. They would have to worry about that. This, if you want to go to the DOE, the Department of Education website, and see what kinds of questions are on their I-STEP tests. I-STEP is different from NWEA. It is not a SMART test. It's you need to get to this point and answer this many questions. And if you don't, you're not at 5th grade. And so there's a certain bar, either you pass it or you don't. And if you don't, we have to give you extra help, and we should.